All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started. This is a joint meeting, Education and Culture Committee and our Public Safety Committee. I want to begin by acknowledging that unfortunately we have two absences. Our Council President and Chair of the Public Safety Committee is actually testifying in Annapolis on behalf of the County Council, and so we really appreciate Council President Katz's leadership. And then unfortunately, Councilmember Jawando already had a existing meeting that was scheduled, and so unfortunately can't be with us today as well. But we are joined by two other members, so we replace them with two other members, Councilmember Glass and Councilmember Friedson. So thank you very much for joining us today. I know this issue is incredibly important, and one of the nice things about it is we also have our chair of our T&E committee, our Transportation, Energy, Infrastructure, and Environment Committee, that actually is the Vice President of the Council as well, who is also on public safety. So that works really well in terms of what our conversation is today, which is about school bus stop safety. I don't want to get into too much in terms of belaboring the point, but certainly after two tragic incidents, one in which a young girl lost her life and another student who was hit, caused us to just want to make sure that we're understanding what our policies are and procedures are, as well as ensuring that we continue to think about what the best ways in which we can keep our kids safe, not only when it's within our school walls, but also when it's going to and from school. And so I know that that's something that our partners remain incredibly passionate about and want to work with us on as well. And so this is an opportunity for us to talk and brainstorm about what it is. Well, first talk about what it is that we currently do, and then also talk about any other kinds of things that we may want to do to ensure that we can continue to try and promote the safety of our kids. And so with that, I'll turn to our Vice President and Public Safety if you had any additional opening comments.
I think you covered it.
Okay. All right. So let me turn to Mr. Howard if there's any opening things that we need to highlight, and then I'll turn to Dr. Zuckerman to kind of lead us off, who's our Chief Operating Officer for Montgomery County Public Schools.
No, just real quickly, the staff report lists the 6 different questions that we asked MCPD and MCPS staff to be prepared to discuss and go through today. And then we just included a whole bunch of historical background information on previous related work sessions that the committees have done over the past few years, especially because some of the council members weren't around for some of those prior work sessions, so to provide some historical information.
Excellent. And I just wanted to highlight for my colleagues on the committees, the joint committees, that what today is going to be about. Obviously, we're not going to be taking any votes. Certainly, there's no action that's coming out of this. But what I do hope is that we have a robust conversation. So if my colleagues that are on the panel can limit presentations, what we really want to get into is discussion and have an opportune time for us to just talk about what it is that we see on the ground, what it is that we're hearing in our communities, and how best we can continue to move us forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Chief Operating Officer of Montgomery County Public Schools for how much longer?
4 or 5 months.
4 or 5 months. And I'm not sure if everyone, and I'm sure our millions watching at home, as Councilmember Jawanda would say, are not aware. Yes, the end of the school year, Dr. Zuckerman, unfortunately, will be leaving his post. But from what I hear, he's looking at going back into the classroom. And so as the son of a teacher, I can certainly say that that is laudable. So thank you very much. Dr. Zuckerman.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice and other council members. This is obviously a very important topic, and one that is very close to us. The tragedy on December 12th and almost impossibly followed the next morning. It just was unimaginable for us. And I remember it wasn't that long ago, and I was the second incident that you referenced involving a student at Walter Johnson High School. We had a principals meeting that morning, and I was up in front of everyone and shared what had happened the day before with our student at Bradley Hills and then Walter Johnson. And we knew right away that we needed to take a very hard look at all of the practices. Coincidentally, Councilmember Glass had a pedestrian safety conference a few days later, where now Assistant Chief Didone and I were there, along with other staff from the police department who have been incredible partners as well as our own Department of Transportation. So I just want you to know how profoundly sad we are about what occurred. And on behalf of Dr. Smith, Superintendent, Board President Evans, we are pleased to be here today to talk with you, and we'll keep our presentation brief as you requested so that we can have questions. I would just share that Dr. Smith and Board President Evans are traveling to Annapolis as well to testify. So with me to my left is Todd Watkins, who you all know is our Director of Transportation. We have a very, very comprehensive, complex, and large, vast transportation system, transporting approximately 100,000 students a day. And that, of course, doesn't include all the students who get to school by bike, by car, whether they're driving or a family member is driving, or walking, or taking a ride on our Metro bus. And we have engaged deeply this year, more so than ever before, to position MCPS to be not just a participant in the work around Vision Zero and around pedestrian safety, but an active leader. And Todd will talk a little bit about the work that we've done and have to do. So with that, I'll certainly yield to Assistant Chief Didone if he has anything to add before we get into just some of the technical details.
We appreciate it. We're a partner as well, and Department of Transportation is the third leg of the stool, and they have representatives in the back, so when we get to some of those questions, I may call them up to assist us. And we have now Captain Dave McBain, who has taken my position in the traffic division, so he'll be doing more of the speaking today than I will.
Excellent. Mr. Watkins.
Good morning. So following up what Andy started there, our transportation department in MCPS is involved in all aspects of getting to school. So we have groups of course ride school buses, about 100,000 a day. We have about a third of the school system, so about 60,000, a little under 60,000 that are not eligible for a school bus and get to school some other way, whether they walk or bike or ride in parent cars or drive themselves. And so we are certainly involved in what safety looks like around school sites and on school sites where this collection of cars comes every morning and afternoon and is met by students walking and biking and things like that. So we, and then we look at for those that are not eligible for a school bus, we look at the routes that they walk, right? And we have some standards I shared with you in the packet, some standards that are in policy and regulation that kind of guide those decisions on a loose level. But many, many of those decisions are made by transportation professionals that have spent their careers doing this kind of work. And so we evaluate those on a very individualized basis while applying those standards. So you guys asked about the placement and location of school bus stops. Let me talk about that for a little bit. I think in general we're talking about regular neighborhood level schools. We break students down into, or transportation services down into those that would go to a typical comprehensive high school that are in close proximity to their home. We do choice or magnet programs where we transport students a long distance, and we use what we call hub stops there, where families participate in getting students to a school or other community location to be picked up. We do, of course, lots and lots of stops for students with special needs. Typically, those are at the house of the student with special needs, and so, and then of course we do homeless and foster, where we go sometimes longer distances to bring students back to their school of origin. And those are very individualized stops also. So I think today what we're talking about in general is neighborhood bus stops. And so we design a school service area with stops that cover the entire area so that no student has very far to walk to a bus stop. We tend to leave those stops in place unless there is some force that changes that, either some kind of construction, some kind of addition of maybe a sidewalk or a pedestrian amenity in the community, maybe additional houses or shifts in the population of a neighborhood from having kids to not having kids as a neighborhood ages. But we generally blanket a service area with stops, and many of those stops are in neighborhood streets on low volume, low speed, residential type streets. The vast majority of our stops are like that, like the one in the Bradley Hills situation. We also have some stops that are along higher volume roads, right? And some of those are, and there's, as you know, well know, there's so many high volume, high speed roads across the county. Even if you just look at state highways, they're just everywhere. And in some cases, we're able to take buses in to those and have stops off of those major roadways. In some cases, you just can't get into those neighborhoods, right? Like houses that are actually on a road like Georgia Avenue as an example, right? There is not a way to serve a student in a situation like that except on Georgia Avenue. So we have lots and lots of those situations. We are looking into stops that are on major roadways that we could possibly do in a different way. And there's always a trade-off there between putting the stop on the major roadway versus detouring the bus off. And there are some safety considerations, right? Sometimes having the bus stop on the more major roadway is better than having the bus turn out onto the major roadway, right? There are some situations like that. There are also a trade-off in efficiency of bus routes. And so we've actually spent the last decade or more moving some of those stops out of neighborhoods onto higher volume roads to be able to serve more students with a bus. Now we're looking to, as part of the Vision Zero effort, we're looking to see, should we be designing that system differently to move some of those back off of the major roadways. And in some cases, we have the opportunity to do that. And so we're in the midst of a review this year to do exactly that. The question comes up a lot about sidewalks, right? And can students walk along a street that does not have sidewalks on it? I can tell you a large percentage of the neighborhoods in Montgomery County do not have sidewalks on their residential streets. Typically, when we have a street that we determine based on the age of the student and the characteristics of the street that a student cannot walk along, we stop at every driveway where there's a student. We do that on roads like Muncaster Mill Road and as an example. But when we talk about a neighborhood like the Bradley Hills neighborhood, and the question has come up, well, that road doesn't have sidewalks on it. How can students walk to a corner bus stop on that? These are streets where, like I say, they're very low volume. They tend to have cars that are doing something in that neighborhood and not thoroughfare kind of streets where kids play and bike and do all kinds of things. But some people get this notion to say if it doesn't have sidewalks, you can't possibly walk along the street. That's not really the position that we or anybody else in the state or really across the nation have taken in terms of school transportation. In low volume, low speed residential streets, we have students walk to corner bus stops typically without sidewalks. When we are determining the fitness of a street for a particular age group of students to walk, it doesn't matter to us whether they're walking to school or walking to a bus stop. If they can walk along the street, if it's a walkable street, some cases you go to bus stops, some cases it's close enough to the school you go to school. The one difference we have that applied to one of the collisions that you talked about was Montrose Road. So Montrose Road is obviously a very busy thoroughfare, and we would never design the system for students to have to cross that road to get to a bus stop. We serve both sides of Montrose Road, like many, many other streets, state highways, and busier county roads throughout the county. In that particular situation, there was a time advantage on the other side of the road, right? You can't, while we serve both sides, it's impossible to time all the bus stops so they're exactly the same on both sides of the road. And in that particular case, there was a time advantage in the morning. The bus on the opposite side of the road for Mr. Haddad came 16 minutes later than the two stops on his side of the road, and he was crossing to get that time advantage. So that is an exception when we look at whether they're walking to school or walking to a bus stop. We don't have them cross major roads to get to a bus stop. When we're evaluating walks to school, we use very age differentiated criteria. For example, students would walk in a neighborhood situation like the Bradley Hills situation to get to a school. students would not cross, elementary students would not cross a major roadway to get to a school except with the assistance of an adult crossing guard. And you'll get to hear some about crossing guards here shortly. At the middle school and high school level, though, students do cross intersections that have pedestrian amenities with them on more major roads to get to school, but not to a school bus stop. And once again, we use the same evaluation. If there is a street that is not walkable, school bus service is provided. If there's a barrier between where students live and the school, some situation that they can't cross, school bus service will be provided, maybe within the neighborhood and neighborhood bus stops. If the whole distance is along non-walkable streets, as an example, like Magruder High School, you can't walk to along Muncaster Mill Road, we might stop at every house and pick up students. So we do a large variety of things to try to design a system that's safe for every student. You guys asked about educational outreach. We have pedestrian traffic safety built into our curriculum at various levels throughout a student's experience in their school, particularly around health and PE curriculum that's mandatory at certain ages that everybody gets and optional at other ages. The AAA Student Safety Patrol program will be talked about here in a little while, is one of our major outreaches to elementary school students. We do twice yearly required school bus evacuation drills to teach students about how to get off the bus in an emergency, and we use those opportunities also to teach about other safety, about loading and unloading off the bus in normal situations, and how to walk to school. And at the elementary school, we do that for every single elementary student. At the high school and middle school, it's just students that ride buses. But at the elementary level, we don't schedule those at bus times. We schedule those in the middle of the day. So we bring the entire elementary school population to those evacuation drills, whether they ride a bus or not. So they all get that educational piece, and they all understand about safely evacuating a school bus for those events where they're riding a bus to a field trip or other kind of events. We have lots of video and web resources. Our drivers and attendants are one of the biggest safety resources we have in terms of presenting safe practices to students. They talk to students all the time. They give general messages to students as well as corrective kind of messages when they see the student doing something unsafe. And then MCPS has recently convened a multi-agency student traffic safety group to kind of bring the Vision Zero work specific to the student level. And we are also going out with quarterly safety messages and campaigns designed around any number of student safety, traffic safety related issues. And then I'll do one more topic and then I'll stop. You asked about technology around bus stops. There is not a lot of technology pieces in place at the run-of-the-mill bus stop, right? Most of the safety technologies related to the bus and the presence of the bus there. We have a very robust stop arm enforcement program with our cameras, and this is the first school year where every single bus is outfitted. It's if not one of a kind, it's very close to one of a kind in the nation to have that level of technology to keep our students safe. When our drivers count every year in the annual national survey, we still get between 800 and 1,200 passes per day that when we count. And I think that while I came along with that statistic several years ago, I think it was an unbelievable number to folks, and I think that now I think the citation numbers are backing that up. So we certainly have that in terms of technology and keeping students safe. There are other products out there in the school bus industry that we're keeping an eye on. One that's recently come out is a big, long, extended stop arm that sticks out from the side of the bus that goes into the other lane and puts a physical stop sign in the lane next to the bus. I have very mixed feelings about something like that, but something like that's out there, and the school bus industry is working on those kind of things. There's a group, I don't know if you saw an article recently about a group that did a presentation, I think they were out of the Clarksburg area, to try to put a hologram of a stop sign in lanes next to buses, right? That might be a more practical solution so that when folks do run, they aren't physically hitting a stop sign that may then hit a student. So we're looking at those kind of things. I think one of the biggest technological improvements is going to be when we put tablet computers on each bus. One of the things that they're going to do eventually, the last piece will be a public-facing parent app once we get the information correct. I think the biggest safety component of that is it will tell folks when the bus is coming. And what I think that will do is, while it won't change the physical characteristics of the bus stop, it should significantly reduce the amount of time students are standing there waiting for a bus, right? So I think that we're going to see lots of safety improvement from that. And then there are systems that do child detection. I think somebody asked that specifically in an email. And the industry is working on those. They're not great yet. And there's a trade-off anytime you put one of these components on the bus where the driver has a role. Right, one of the things we're so happy about in our stop arm enforcement program is that the driver doesn't have to do anything to take their attention off of kids. Right, it works completely independent of the driver. When you put these systems on, like child detection systems, it's one more input for a driver at a time when they are overwhelmed with inputs on safety things that they're supposed to watch at a bus stop. So there's mixed review of those kind of systems. Baltimore County is using those. You probably saw in the news, Baltimore County had a dragging incident recently in the last couple of months on a bus with a child detection system, right? And it just didn't detect the child. And so the other trade-off is that drivers would come to rely on a system like that, right? That doesn't always work. And so we're watching that. Is my point. We're watching the industry and what's coming out there. School bus industry is a very safety-oriented industry. I mean, my colleagues all across, not only in our department, but all across the state and the nation, our focus is safety. And I'm very proud to be part of that community. I hope I've answered some of your questions. I will turn.
Well, actually, we're going to stop right there,
Okay.
because I know we have a couple lights on, and I have a couple questions for you, as well
Okay.
as a couple suggestions in terms of just thoughts moving forward. And again, what I don't want to do is have us kind of have a prolonged discussion or debate about it. I'd just like for us, as folks have ideas, I'd like for you to just explore and see if it's something that may work or may be possible. So I'll start with one of the ones that you talked about when it comes to neighborhoods. And certainly one in which the era of Waze and Google Maps have completely changed and obliterated what we knew was a neighborhood street. Everyone has seen it who lives on something that was a maybe pass-through thoroughfare for, 10 people a morning, and now becomes to where you have hundreds of drivers going through to avoid because there's an accident on XYZ street or whatever the case may be. So that safety measure that used to be there is no longer there for a lot of our streets that we assume are still neighborhood streets. Growing up on Northgate Drive in Lay Hill, Maryland, I never had a sidewalk, and our bus always came. But in addition to that, I also walked. I walked from there to Belpre Elementary School the majority of the time. And so I walked down that street every day, and didn't have a sidewalk. And so I agree with you that that's what the norm was for us, because it was just neighborhood traffic, and everyone knew, including the council president's chief of staff, who also lived in that same neighborhood. Everyone knew that, you watched out for kids because you knew kids were going to be walking to and from school. That's how it worked. The challenge is that awareness isn't there as much anymore. And the reality is that unfortunately part of the problem is not you. It's our drivers who just aren't paying attention and are distracted and are punching in the directions to Waze as they leave their neighborhoods. And so from that perspective, the distracted driving has gone so far beyond just the typical texting of folks, but even just punching in or finding out and figuring out what the different routes are that you can take. And you're doing that as you're leaving your neighborhood. And so from that perspective, those are the kinds of things that have changed the paradigm in terms of the safety that we used to grant to those neighborhood streets. And so from that perspective, that's where I think that we can gain a little bit when it comes to rethinking how safe those neighborhood streets truly are now versus where they were even 5 years ago. And the other piece when it comes to technology, and I'm going to turn to Council Member Navarro, Albornoz, Hucker, and then Glass and Friedson, because everybody has their light on. is about the technology piece. And I know personally, and I try and do an excellent job of looking around me, but my car is outfitted with an incredible system that 3 times that I know, and I can count each one, including a parking lot at the Matini Shopping Center when I was backing out, leaving Popeyes, where I swear to God, if my thing had not beeped and told me, I would have ended up hitting someone. It happened at the Walmart shopping center at Milestone. Same exact thing. And that technology, which we now see on a lot of vehicles, has helped to avoid a lot of these incidents. Now, again, you're talking about low speed, so fortunately, hopefully, it wouldn't have been that bad of an incident anyway. But again, that's with looking. That's with looking behind you. But having this monitor that also can sense coming from the left and right hand sides, because if you're backing out with 2 vehicles parked alongside you, there's a limited view in which you can see anyway because of what's there. And so that begs the question also, not just technology, but about education. And we really have to ensure that we're educating our kids about not assuming that you can be seen. My daughters, who you know, one of which had an incident, is actually on the other side of it when it comes to caution. I'm oftentimes trying to encourage her, okay, Kaylin, it's good. You can go ahead and walk now. But out of an abundance of caution now does it, and I don't stamp that out of her because it's better to be overly cautious than not, understanding that so many of our kids aren't. I think we would have value, and so to you, Dr. Zuckerman, in terms of really having a robust program that educates our kids about how to safely walk, understanding I'm not placing blame with them, but the reality is that they can have a part and play a part in terms of their own safety by making sure that we're looking out for those who might not be looking out for you, right? And so I think educating our kids beyond the bus riders, but especially the walkers who walk along these these very high activity streets and roadways and sometimes highways, they need to know, because most of the time it's this, headphones in as they're walking, and they assume because they have the light that they're going to be safe. We know all too well that hasn't happened, and a white light doesn't protect you, unfortunately, from a person who may be distracted and who may not be paying attention or may assume that they can make that right turn on red without looking at the fact that there's a walk signal and end up hitting someone. And so from that perspective, I think that we really have to create a program that is mandatory for all of our kids that talks about pedestrian safety and the mechanisms that they need to. I know some of our schools have done it, and it's been on a voluntary basis with our principals. I know that it impacts the school day. I understand that. But the reality is that a child who's, been hit and who unfortunately may, end up with the ultimate is never going to be able to attend a class, is never going to be able to do any of the kinds of things that you want them to do. And so I think that the value is clear. It's worth it in terms of the safety and the lives of our children. So those are my 2. I'm going to turn to Councilmember Navarro, again, Councilmember Albornoz, Chair Hucker, and then Councilmembers Glass and Friesen.
Can I make one quick response?
Yeah, please.
We do have backing cameras with backing alarms on the buses, and we've been equipping them that way for several years.
Okay. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you so much, and really appreciate not only the concern, the care, but also the willingness to revisit all of this. There's no doubt that people don't quite have sometimes a sense of how large this operation is on a daily basis when it comes to our transportation for our students. So it's an extraordinary feat every single day. And these particular incidents and these accidents and these fatalities are just absolutely heartbreaking situations where we've got to obviously, do everything possible. I think that as somebody who's been so frustrated every single day, getting the notices and the alerts and all the pedestrian fatalities and pedestrian accidents that we have been experiencing, and trying to figure out what is happening. And I can't help but think that, of course, Montgomery County at some point in time was designed as a bedroom community, and it has really evolved. And unfortunately, the design of those neighborhoods and those intersections, et cetera, back in the day were designed in one way, and now it's not necessarily how reality, is, because we have a lot more dense populations in particular neighborhoods that before were just, sleepy bedroom communities. And so somehow we have got to, I think, take a step back and just reimagine very quickly what is it going to take for us to now redesign, which is a huge feat, all of these particular neighborhoods and roads, et cetera. But to that end, I mean, I'm looking forward to hearing more about everything that is being done, but I do want to bring up, something that I feel, very, very strongly about, and it's this issue that there's just a lot of trauma out there in the communities right now, especially those who have experienced these accidents and these incidents with students. And, I know that my office has written, to you, and we did receive a response, Andy, regarding the bus stop on Georgia Avenue near Hewitt Avenue, where the high school, students had been hit, et cetera. And there's been a lot of work with Vision Zero in that community as well. And I just think it just behooves us to make sure that we respond right away. I don't think it's enough to say to community members that we're going to study it and we're going to see and we're going to find out. We need to do something there, and we need to move that bus stop like yesterday. I know that, because I travel there every day for years and years and years. There is that apartment complex, and there's a lot of students from elementary school, middle school, and high school who get picked up, but they're lined up into the complex, apartment complex, and then the bus stops there. Everybody's supposed to stop, of course, and but they're not so vulnerable. They're not hanging out in the sidewalk like this for some reason. This high school bus stop, which is just a few feet down, had to be standing right there in the sidewalk. When we know that Georgia Avenue, obviously, it's a very busy, and that area is difficult to navigate nonetheless. It's a major problem. But so I'm just pleading with you to please immediately do something to move that particular stop for those high school students. There is just so much trauma in the community. And I will say it up front, a community that doesn't necessarily, it doesn't show up a lot of times to give testimony or to write letters and emails. And therefore, I feel even more urgent sense of making sure that we respond appropriately. And of course, be methodical about looking and examining the other areas within that particular part of the county that continues to be a challenge for our Vision Zero, the whole Aspen Hill area, et cetera. So if I will be following up with you again, but I just wanted to say that publicly, that I think that we owe that community to make this change. I don't know if it's possible to do it with the apartment complex that is right there. There seems to be a little bit more of a barrier, but whatever we can do, I think that, we should move ahead and just do it immediately. And again, thank you, because I know, I know that all of us are just every day with this level of anxiety, trying to figure out what exactly is going on. And we have got to do some analyses to look at what are those common denominators that are, for some reason, exacerbating this issue around the county.
So the Aspen Hill Apartments is one where we have lots of bus stops, not only for neighborhood schools, but it's part of the Down County Consortium. So there's 5 schools that serve it there, and then lots of students with special needs. And you just can't get a bus into that one. It's one that's kind of frustrating to us. We wish we could. And is the stop that you're talking about up the street, you're talking about up in front of Rita's?
Yes, it was the one with the students. It was a freak accident, and the students were
yes.
injured.
Yes. So they were walking on their way to that bus stop when that happened. The stop is actually there on that side of the road. There's no students that live over there, right? The stop is actually there because we had so much problem on the other side of Georgia Avenue with students getting off the bus and just darting across Georgia Avenue there to get to those stores. And same thing in the morning when the bus would pull up, it'd be coming from all directions over in that shopping center. In fact, the students that were hit that day live on the opposite side of Georgia Avenue, where there is a stop. And so...
which is hard to navigate, crossing Georgia Avenue to get to the stop anyway, right?
Absolutely. And so we normally wouldn't have a stop in a place like that, and we only did it to try to get students to ride that bus if they were going to the shopping center instead of getting off on the southbound side of Georgia and darting across. And so that's been one we've looked at a lot. I was under the, I thought we had moved that back off of the roadway some into the shopping center, but it sounds like you're telling me you're seeing the students still waiting along Georgia.
I'm still getting,
I will,
right, I'm still getting emails and.
I will check that
concerns.
immediately,
So
but
if we
but
could-
we had, in response to that situation, I thought, and I haven't been out to check lately, that we had moved that into the shopping center near the Ritas, but I will check that immediately.
I really do appreciate
But
it.
Aspen Hill Apartments, physically, the physical dimensions of the parking lot there
Yeah.
prevent us from taking a bus in, so that one is gonna have to stay on Georgia. That's one of those examples I talked about before where we just aren't able to move it.
And I literally like observe that one every single day, but there seems to be real discipline where the students do line up into, I mean, everybody's like single file into the apartment complex, and then the bus comes and there's no way. And I only know that because, of course, when I see that the bus are there, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be like 10 minutes late, because there are a lot of students, and people have been, by and large, pretty respectful and have obeyed the arm, you know, but I realize that there's just quite a volume. But it seems to me that at least they're safe because they have no exposure other than to come out of that, you know, walkway in the parking, in the apartment complex onto the door. So I just wonder if we can, you know, piggyback on that in some way, if it's possible.
One of the things we're looking to do for those situations where we have to or decide it's the right move to keep us a stop on a higher volume road, or even really for all bus stops, we're looking to do a student safety campaign that talks about wait back, right? Regardless of the level, even if you're on two relatively minor streets, if one of them has more traffic, wait back on the other one, right? There's no reason that on a George Avenue bus stop or like that, you have to wait on the white line next to the lane, right? In many, many cases, there's an ability, or at least the physical setup would allow waiting back 50 feet. And there's no reason not to do that. So we're looking at trying to do that and seeing what's happening across the country in that kind of campaign to get, well, I'm not blaming either, but I agree with you that everybody has to contribute. If students could stand back from the roadway, it would certainly limit their exposure. And then, like I said, when the technology piece comes, we'll be able to not have them waiting there a much shorter time period.
Thank you.
Before I turn to Councilmember Albornoz, just to tie on that piece, if there's a way that we can also have targeted education. So if we know that there are more risky areas to where there's something very particular for that area, or for areas that are similar in terms of that nature, so that we know that children that are on main thoroughfares, the Wait Back campaign needs to be something specifically for them. I think about my daughter who was on Richter Farm, another very windy road that folks speed on oftentimes. So I have her on the adjoining Falcon Crest instead of waiting there, and then when the bus comes, just as you said, plenty of time for you to then walk up to the bus. Those are the kinds of things that we need to continue to focus on. Councilmember Albornoz.
Also, and just
Yep.
additional strategies, parent volunteers, and other adult supervision tactics that we can take too to reinforce the types of things you're talking about that we are looking at.
Excellent. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you. I very much associate myself with all the comments so far. This obviously is so tragic and so difficult to process on so many different levels and very timely. I had 2 questions and then 3 suggestions. The first question is, in our assessment of school bus stops, do we look at the lighting in that particular area in helping to determine whether or not a bus stop is more appropriate in one location than another? Does that factor at all into the equation?
So we do where there are options, right? So some neighborhoods, there's just not lighting, right? And so you have to pick a spot anywhere. And so sometimes we don't have that option. Where there is a well-lit and a not well-lit option, we certainly look at that and try to factor that in.
Okay, thank you. And then we've alluded to it a couple of different times, but are there definitive patterns that have emerged that we've identified? Are most of these occurring at night? Are most of them occurring in specific geographic regions? Is it happening more with elementary versus middle versus high school? Or is this just spread across the board and somewhat random? In our analysis so far, have there been clear patterns that have emerged?
We haven't done the analysis recently, but I remember a council session a couple of years ago where we did detail analysis and we looked at it a quarter-mile radius from the school, and I actually went through every crash report There is not a pattern or trend. It's all levels. We've seen the middle school, high school, more high school area when you have people making bad decisions and rushing out into traffic. But none of them's basically on the route to school, except for the middle school where she was crossing the street and the parent made the made the left turn unsafely after dropping off her own child, then struck the other child. But for the most part, there's not a pattern. Councilmember Glass's assistant asked us to pull some data, and we're going to work on that, but that's not quick because we have no fast way of doing it, but I'll go through the same process again and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And then in terms of just 3 suggestions, I really appreciate the focus on innovation, and I know we've always been at the forefront in not bashful in investing in technology early, acknowledging it's a public safety issue. I do think there may be some opportunities for us to not have to wait for innovation to occur and us to maybe proactively seek it. And I'll give you a specific example, and I've discussed this with Councilmember Rice. He's absolutely right, and all of us sort of anecdotally know that it's the distracted driving, which is one very important piece of this puzzle. One opportunity that may exist would be to proactively work with a Waze or a Google Maps or a Google so that we provide sensors on buses and there's a ping that goes off on your Google Maps app if a stop sign has been dispatched, as another way to help a distracted driver who's maybe plugging in an address at least is acknowledged that there is a school bus stop that has stopped in their immediate vicinity. And that obviously would require proactively reaching out to some of these technology companies, but it's in their own best interest to identify solutions like this. And I think if, there's lots of contacts to Google here locally. And if there's any interest in pursuing something like that, I think it'd be worth talking to them and seeing if we can get something like that off the ground.
I think that's a very interesting idea that I will look into. I have lots of connections on the state and national level also in this arena to pursue, something like that. We have offered ourselves to companies that are looking to develop technology many times to try things out. And so we like you say, we're not bashful about that. We try to do that. We want to be on the forefront and give people a laboratory that they sometimes need to test those kind of things, as long as we don't think it puts anybody in jeopardy along the way. And so that's a very interesting suggestion that I will look into.
And the other just random suggestion is at the back to school fair, one of the items that was passed out as a free giveaway were reflectors that people could put on that students could put on their backpacks. I think we could be more intentional about maybe even if it's allowed, requiring that reflectors be put on backpacks or some other mechanism to further provide a solution for kids that's something that's dispatched at the beginning of the year, and they just stick it right on their backpack at the beginning of the year. I mean, there's solutions like that are out there that I think are low cost that may help. And I can't stress enough the importance of just general awareness. So we're obviously using all of the various tools at our disposal within our respective public information offices, but a coordinated effort so that we truly are using every tool at our disposal, whether it's right on buses, whether it's placing advertisements in various publications, whether it's using social media effectively to just get people thinking more about this issue, not just with regards to school bus safety, but just pedestrian safety in general. It's obviously going to take an all hands on deck approach. So thank you very much for the continued efforts. Appreciate it.
One of the, you triggered a thought in me with the reflectors. At some point one of the best ways to use the school bus app that we look to move into in the near future is to give student-specific information. So a text when your student checks into the bus to say, your student got on at this stop at this time on this bus, and the same thing in the afternoon when they get off. And that requires an RFID of some sort. And so maybe we look to combine purposes there. Instead of using an ID card, maybe we use some kind of reflectorized thing that goes on the backpack that does the RFID read when the student gets on and off the bus. So maybe maybe we look in that regard.
Chair Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, you all have a presentation coming, right? A little short one. Okay, I'll reserve my questions for you till after that. But okay, so Todd and Andy, thanks. Tom said there wasn't a pattern, but I'm not sure. It seems like a small number. I mean, right in the packet, it has a small number of stops are responsible for a large number of citations, and they tend to be on state highways or 4-lane roads at least, without a median, right? Colesville Road, East-West Highway, Piney Branch Road, probably Belpre, right? I'm glad to hear what you said, Todd, about you're revisiting where some of those stops are. What's the plan to look at which of those could be relocated?
Well, I would just jump in and say that we are eager to continue that data analysis, and I think you're right, Councilmember Hucker, just anecdotally looking at even just thinking about this year, we tend to see students, even if it's at a very slow speed, struck on some of the major roadways. And so part of it is going to be a look at stops, which we're in the midst of reviewing right now along the lines of what Councilmember Navarro said. The other piece is going to have to be a proactive education campaign along the lines of what you guys are talking about. For example, we have seen, and we have to work, a lot of this is actually working specifically with individual schools and the leadership teams of those schools where we have a bus stop and then we see students take an end run or a shortcut to get to a store after school, or where we start observing that. That actually, requires a broad-based communication plan, as we've discussed, but it also requires very intentional work with our school folks who are on the ground, and they're great. I mean, we have principals who, you can see it. Principals Northwood will walk down to the bus stop, to the ride-on stop, where we have a lot of students. We haven't even kind of gotten into that piece of the equation and waiting along major roadways for that. So part of it is where we know this is occurring, we have to work very closely with the individual schools.
Sure. You do make it sound more complicated than I would have assumed it is. Several of these locations are areas I know very well in my district. They're not arterials like up county where there might be an intersection every half mile or something. There are intersections every block. Why is it more difficult than it seems to me, or probably to parents who might ask the same question, just to move the stop from 8800 Colesville Road, where you have 3,900 violations, around the corner that's the closest to that stop?
And that's exactly what we're looking at now, and we're going to be moving.
How long does it take?
Well, we're studying it right now. We're moving them as we find them. So
how long does the study take?
So we do an annual review of routes, and we're doing that all between January and early February, and then you'll see many of those moving. The issue, though, you're talking
after February, in this school year.
Some of them will be this school year, and some of them we will strategically plan those to do the most urgent ones now, and then some at the change of the school year. But the data you're talking about, where we see lots of passing events,
right? We
know, and we knew that even before we started automated enforcements, and we never design those stops for anybody to cross ever. And so we've known that for many, many years. And so whether you have the stop on Colesville Road, right, or whether it dips into a complex or whatever to pick up, the risk is still from the student on the other side of the street, right, who for whatever reason wants to use that bus stop.
Yeah.
Right. That's the greater risk, in my opinion, on those, and where we see some of those. We had one last night, right? We had one last night of students crossing Georgia Avenue,
sure,
right, at Hathaway, and they were crossing the street, not waiting along the street. So I agree with you. There's some risk of waiting along the street, but students who cross kind of against the design of the system that serves both sides are probably the bigger issue in regard to those passing statistics.
Sure. No, I agree with you that there's probably dangerous design involved in each of these, and state highway, which we all know a lot about, isn't very quick to fix their design to make it safer. But the 3,900 citations on the 8800 block of Colesville Road, they came from drivers passing a school bus, not from students jaywalking or whatever across Colesville Road. That risk may remain regardless of where the bus stop is. I take your point. But if the bus stop were around the corner on a residential street or in the strip mall or something else that's right there, and people had a safer, quieter place to exit and enter the bus, you wouldn't have 3,900 cars passing it, correct?
My point is, when I answered Mr. Alberno's question, I was talking about crashes, not passes. And just so you know, as I told you from the last council session, Mr. Hetherington and I are pulling the data, and he's looking at the data, category of roads. He's also pulled up direction of travel. And although the ones you're seeing in the highest volume of travel, from the data that I have so far, which is preliminary, we have more vehicles passing in the same direction than we do on the opposite side of the road. Now, each stop's different, so what we're trying to do is inverse what we did in putting the cameras on the buses. We want to look at the lanes of travel where the violations occur, the sides and the types of roads, then apply that to the individual stops, so that when we look to make categorical change, we can identify an exact pattern. So it isn't just, we want to move it off the 8800 block of Colesville. We want to identify the roadways and the stops that are like the 8800 block of Colesville if we're going to make the changes. Instead of making them one at a time, we flag them all for review and then all for considering changes. That's the inverse order that countywide. That's what we did when we went to put cameras on the buses. We looked for where we had the violations from Todd's people. We then looked at the roadway types, and then we decided, well, these stops also match that roadway type. So if we're getting violations here, then we're probably going to get violations there, and that's how we started putting the cameras on. So when we started using the same methodology in the inverse. Now, we just got all the buses outfitted, so I told you it will take a little bit of time, but we've already been working on this, and our goal is to get it, but to do it right, not do it haphazard. Pull this one because it has 3,900 citations.
With all due respect, we're all for doing it right, but if you have a block and one stop on one block that has 3,900 violations a year, so we're talking about like 10 a day roughly, if my math is right, right? Almost, I don't know that you need a battery of traffic engineers to figure out that moving it almost anywhere else would result in fewer passing violations at least, right?
I understand that, but we're also looking to see why the violations are occurring. Is it because it's the 6-lane road and not a median? So is the correct approach, as Todd said, sometimes it's safer to have it on there, maybe a median gets installed, but we want to do it correctly and we want to do it wisely. I understand that you're looking at the high volume and let's just get it off the road, then we have less violations. But that's just one way of doing it, but we want to do it collectively, and that's what we told you we would do when we came up last time.
Okay, seems like quite a wait given the emergency we seem to be facing here. Does MCPS, Todd, coordinate with DOT traffic ops when determining bus stop locations?
So we work with DOT on any kind of problematic issues that we have, right? So when we see a problem at a bus stop that we think can be addressed through an engineering kind of fix or a signage fix or whatever, we work very closely with MCDOT and State Highway Administration. We don't necessarily work with them every time we place a bus stop.
Okay. When I've asked the same question to them, they say, no, we don't work with MCPS. We don't really hear from them on that.
In fact, one of the folks behind me here is the half of the county MCDOT MCPS liaison specifically for that purpose. So they have two positions designated that a lot of their responsibility is specifically to work with MCPS on these very kind of issues. And we have similar kind of contacts with SHA.
Can I ask a question about what's the role of bus speed and the speeds drivers are allowed to go and the amount of time they're allotted for their route? My anecdotal experience dropping my kids off every morning is I'm often surprised how quickly buses not only head down residential streets, even over speed bumps, even within a block of the school, where they know there will be a high density of pedestrians. But very fast turns off those highways into that residential neighborhood. And I'm not saying that necessarily to beat up on the bus drivers. Maybe we have some bad drivers, I don't know, but I assume they're not. But I assume, do they have a time by which they have to get to the school? And how often is their entire route reconsidered to make sure they have enough time? I know I can't get my kids moving fast enough in the morning, and if they're picking up kids and they have a certain number of stops, do they have enough time to pick up those kids and get to the school where they're not facing professional pressure to get to the school on time and tempted to exceed safe driving speed limits?
Sure. So we design our routes to have enough time. In the afternoon, when schools get out in fairly rapid succession, we design the amount of time between schools versus the type of routes we have and the number of routes for kind of the average, right? And there's some that just don't make it, and they're not expected on the route sheet to be there at the bell time of the next school. We know that's a reality. There is still sometimes a perceived pressure, even though we say take your time, go slow or whatever, to make that bell time, right? And so one of the things that we are looking forward to in the technology piece I talked to with putting a tablet computer on each bus is that there's lots of GPS systems out there, right, that tell you where the bus was or where it is right now. The problem is you really need something that's tied to where the bus is supposed to be. So there's electronic analysis that shows you exception reporting, right? Because it's completely overwhelming to look at, we have GPS on 1,200 buses that ran this morning, right? But without a comparison to tell you how did this bus do compared to what it was supposed to do, that's a very difficult endeavor to even think about the analysis of that. And so one of the improvements I think we're going to get out of this system is when we get that kind of reporting, I think it will enhance what we already do. We already design them so they can make it within a reasonable amount of time. Some feel the pressure to be there. Some want to be the first in line at the school. I mean, there's all kinds of pressures that go into this that we do our best to manage.
Sure. How often are they reconsidered, though, to adjust for changing school populations, changing traffic patterns?
Every year.
Construction, every year.
Yes. And that's the process we're going through right now in January and February for the next school, where we're also looking at, can we move some stop locations off major roadways? We're also looking at every single route in our system.
Once a year for every school. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I had a question about, you talked about the educational programming and outreach to students, and I saw for parents, the Ride by the Rules document that's in the packet. Is that, and are there other materials, and are they published in other languages as well?
Yes, there are other materials. Yes, many of them are produced in other languages. And we are working now on our quarterly safety kind of campaigns and messages to push those out more so that people are just the passive recipients of those rather than having to go somewhere to look for them. We're kind of changing our approach on that to get to more people that are not necessarily going to go look on wherever to get.
Can you talk about that? Like, what are the roles of materials being sent home in backpacks, materials being referred to in the call I get every week, materials publicized on social media, the PTAs?
Right. So there's lots of stuff we have available for people to go get right now.
Right.
But we're looking to kind of change that around and use many of the avenues you're talking about to push them out so that all they have to do is exist and they get it. Right. So we're looking at kind of changing our approach on that.
And what's
we do PSAs.
Timeline for that change?
In the immediate near future. I mean,
like this spring?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And I do want to piggyback on something that Councilmember Hucker said just very quickly, which is about outreach to parents. It's one of the things that I continue to find a little challenging when it comes to identifying where your bus stop is. Something that, again, will help folks because, I've told this story before, but about the time when my daughter first started going to Kingsview, and to give your bus driver credit, as we were about to cross 118, because the bus will stop with the stop arm out, there's no median, so they're supposed to stop in both directions, and so we're at Crown's Gate, right there at 118, but it's on the opposite side. And we thought, hey, this is, because when we looked at the thing, it said, this is where, this is the closest bus stop to where you are. And I'm like, oh, that's right across the street, literally from where my house is. And so parents will oftentimes assume that. And so some sort of tool to where you punch in your address and your bus stop comes up, or the closest couple of bus stops come up, because just as you said, from a timing perspective, folks will figure out something like that, that if you could work on something like that would be incredibly helpful and be a lot easier for folks to be able to then understand where their bus stop is, all those kinds of things, and be able to get more information about what those routes are as well.
Sure. I hate to keep going back to this tablet solution on buses, but it's coming with that. We're going to have a policy change. Right now, what we do is we publish a list of bus stops.
Right.
And we let people kind of use the bus stop that works best for them. And when we see folks crossing a road like that, we say, hey, you can't cross that road. In the future, when we do this, if we want student-specific reporting, we're going to have to assign those bus stops. And then we're going to have a policy question that comes up. Like Mr. Haddad at Walter Johnson, right? He would have had a bus stop assigned on his side of Montrose Road. We're going to have a policy decision about whether or not we allow the use of a stop on the other side of Montrose Road. And so I brought this up in a meeting we had, the MCPS meeting I talked about before. We had that earlier this morning. When I brought that up, there was very strong reaction about you can't take away a student like that's ability to ride on a bus 16 minutes later in the morning. That makes a huge difference. And so we're going to have a real policy issue to wrestle with when we know we designed it for folks not to cross Montrose Road, and now we know they are. What are we going to do about that, right? How are we going to, and there's very mixed and very strong feelings about what the right answer to that question is. I have some mixed feelings myself.
Yeah, and I think that's...
And in some of those timing issues, it's much more than 16 minutes. When you look at like the Einstein bus, I used an example this morning, that goes down and serves all the way down at the far reaches of the county inside the Beltway, right? I mean, to Tacoma Park. The difference in riding the bus that's on your side of the street versus the one going the other direction can be a half hour or 35 minutes. And do we take away that opportunity for a student to try to cross that road safely, not with the lights of the bus, right? But maybe before the bus gets there, after it leaves or whatever. It's a real issue that we're going to have to wrestle with.
And it's a great topic of what we're wrestling with when it comes to Vision Zero. And so I will turn to Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In 2019, we had 13 deaths and 593 incidents here in Montgomery County, and that's why we're here. And that's why we, as a council, continue having this conversation, and we have more conversations taking place in the coming weeks because we all understand the emergency that we're facing, as has been said. Assistant Chief Didone, I appreciate you recognizing that we need to dive deeper into the data. We need to take a look at those 593 incidents to see where they're taking place, to see if we can, the demographic breakdown between students and adults, where they are. The data is so important, as my colleagues have been saying, and quite frankly, I think there are two big data sets here that we're talking about that are so critically important. One, as has been mentioned, is the data sets from the bus cameras. You know, over the last 3 years, bus camera citations have gone from 16,000 to nearly 54,000. And if we overlay that with the 593 incidents just this year alone, not to count the hundreds of incidents that have preceded in the years before, that's the heat map. That's the incident map. And that's what we need to do. And so I appreciate you recognizing the importance of that so that we can take a look back to see where we need to move forward. Yeah, sure.
If we did that, I think the results would be minimal, but if we added that same approach to ride-on buses, you're going to see a very significant data set that you're going to want to study hard.
There should be no difference between any of these road incidents and pedestrian incidents, and there's going to be a conversation in an hour or two talking about ride-on buses and kids. And again, in the next week and 2 weeks thereafter, the council is going to be having more conversations about Vision Zero. So more data, more analysis, so that we know exactly where these high rate incidents are, so that, quite frankly, we need DOT, MCDOT at this table. And I understand the nature of this conversation, and they'll be at future conversations, but we can't have these in a vacuum. Going back to some of the thoughts that have been shared, I appreciate the thoroughness of this packet. I just want to applaud staff going back to similar conversations that had been done in years prior, because back in November of 2015, and I think the assistant chief alluded to this the last time some of this deep dive had been done, or that granular level of analysis, back in 2015 it had been shown that Richard Montgomery and Kennedy high schools had the highest incidence of student incidents, students who were hit. And to know the demographic breakdowns of those schools, it is of no surprise, because pedestrian safety is a socioeconomic issue, where we know that African American and Latinx individuals are hit at a rate nearly a third higher than the general population. And so the populations of those schools match with those unfortunate statistics. And again, when we do a deep dive onto the heat map, we unfortunately will probably see more of these similarities. I also appreciate the thoughts that Councilmember Albornoz talked about regarding the technology and the crowdsourcing. I think that is a really innovative way. Let people who are looking to enter into this space use our large data sets and figure out how we can interpret it better. So I would welcome that initiative, and hopefully this information is not proprietary, so that we can share it with them, and then we can learn from it. And then also, Mr. Watkins, what you talked about regarding the wait backs. I understand why we would think that way, because kids who are waiting on any of the state highways, as Councilmember Hucker said, most of these are happening there, and they are high intensity roads for all intents and purposes, and so wanting people to step back. But what that basically means to me is re-engineering. And whether it's the re-engineering of the road or re-engineering of the bus stops, that is why the Department of Transportation is so integral to this conversation. So however we reimagine our roads and our bus stops to make them safer for everybody, that should be the goal. So I'm glad that you're at least thinking through that way. And then the last thought I'll say is that I'm going to be, within the next month or two, we will have a Vision Zero coordinator in the county, which has been a long time coming. In the 2 years since the previous council adopted this very ambitious 41-point plan to make our roads safer. And what I hope and expect from this Vision Zero coordinator is to cut through the bureaucracy, to force MCPS to work with the Department of Transportation, to work with the police department. And if that collaboration and cooperation is not happening, then that light will be shined and names will be called, because that's what this demands. And so I know that there are these collaborations taking place, but they're not enough. And that's what the Vision Zero coordinator will be charged with. And so I look forward to continuing this conversation in the coming weeks. You will all be back here again, different room, but same topic. And I hope and pray that the statistics that we've talked about today don't change. But unfortunately, I know they're going to. And so we have a lot of work to do, and thank you for being here.
I just want to make one comment on that. So I agree with you, the collaboration is very important. I just want to say, from my perspective, we get no resistance to collaboration whatsoever from the police, from MCDOT, or from State Highway on working on any of these kind of issues. I mean, it's, so if I don't know if you were insinuating that there's resistance to that, but I don't sense any of that.
Sure. I hear that. I think what the Vision Zero coordinator, what that role will do is someone who's not parochial to any one agency or department and can kind of cut through it all, or at least have that 30,000-foot vision. Because I understand you all are operating within your spheres, within your areas of jurisdiction. I get that. But we need somebody looking out at the broader picture to help shine the light on these problems and help find solutions.
Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you for that. And first of all, I think I speak for everybody when I say that I am absolutely devastated about why we're here. But I appreciate the fact that we are here having this discussion, which is critically important, and I appreciate the chairs pushing this issue forward and making sure that we're addressing it with the urgency that we need. I think Councilmember Hucker's point, Chair Hucker's point about the need to move forward with urgency, the idea that we'd be continuing to study issues when there have been more than 100 incidents a day does not put us in a position where it appears to the public, understandably, that we are treating this issue as the crisis that it is, as the public safety health crisis that it is. It's not a targeted criticism of any one person or agency. I think it's a reflection of the reality that we just have not moved forward anywhere near as quickly as we should have, as we need to, in order to address the circumstances that we find ourselves. And you heard Councilmember Glass talk about the number of incidents, fatalities, and collisions from last year, and the fact that we've started 2020 worse than we left off 2019. December 12th and December 13th, the two incidents, both in my district, that have been cited, those 48 hours were the worst 48 hours I have ever had. I hope never in my public life will I ever have a 48-hour stretch as devastating as those 2 days, both from my public position, the responsibility that I feel in that sense, and also the personal connection that I have to some of the incidents with family members who are part of the school community and experience that in the most personal of ways. And my personal journey, my personal interest in politics started in 5th grade, actually. I was advocating for a change of a bus route. We made a left turn, a dangerous left turn onto a major road heading to school, and I didn't think it was a very good idea. My parents didn't even make that left turn because it was dangerous coming out of our neighborhood onto a major road, yet the school system had the bus take that left turn. I tried to advocate to change it with my principal. It didn't work out. So we got into a really significant bus crash, a major bus crash. Fortunately, there were no fatalities. There were no major serious injuries, but a car literally went under the almost the whole of the bus. The entire car came out the other end, and it really impacted me in a significant way, and it really has kept me interested and focused on the need to make changes. And so with that in mind, a lot of the issues that I was going to raise have been raised, so I'll try not to repeat them, but one issue, and I speak to the personal journey that I have been through and the many of the incidents that have been discussed here today, including Councilmember Navarro's comments about the Georgia Avenue and Hewitt Avenue incident, and Councilmember Hucker's comments about the specific intersection with 3,900 incidents as well. What is the process when complaints come forward? Whether it's complaints from the police or a specific incident happens, fatality or other serious collision or repeated number of collisions. Beyond the every year we look at everything, we figure out what's working and what's not. What's the process for when parents, when students, when administrators, when police officers, when crossing guards raise a question about the safety of a particular bus stop or a particular intersection or a particular bus route?
So our department is divided up into kind of a cluster model with managers that have boots on the ground in that cluster, and we start there and looking at the things that come in by email or things like that, we look at that level with the folks that know the most about it to see if there's something different we should be doing, like a left turn you would.
What does that mean? Who would be included in the people who know the most about it?
There's multiple levels to that. There's the drivers themselves, there's bus route supervisors, there are transportation cluster managers, there's depot managers, and there's Todd Watkins himself. It's some combination of that, and that's happening on a weekly basis. Right now, it's probably happening that there's a team looking at a particular route, a particular bus stop. We'll obviously look at the one that Mr. Hucker is talking about, but it just depends on the nature of the complaint or the concern or the ask. I'll give you an example. I receive emails all the time from families. There's a sharp turn on a road. It's not safe for my student to be positioned there. Can we look at doing some of the things we're talking about? We will immediately send a team out. We assess it. Something had changed with lighting, for example, that someone had mentioned earlier, and so we'll need to move the stop back 20 yards or up the street 20 yards to address or potentially road construction, things like that. So this is happening. It's happening regularly. It's definitely not just an annual process as concerns come in.
I appreciate that. I think that we should look into a formalized way, not just for the complaint to come forward, but for the parents and the students and the teachers and the other support staff at the schools who are aware of the incidents to be part of that process, because parents and students and teachers know what's safe and what's not safe. They know better than anybody about the safety of the roads near the schools, the way that the kids get to and from school, and I just think that really needs to be a part of the process, and we need to reverse the way that we're looking at these issues for less of a top-down and more of a bottom-up approach. Again, it's not a criticism, but I think the interest is there, but I think we need to figure out a way to formalize that into the process to really understand the nuances, as opposed to complaint comes in, crew goes out, they do their own deliberation, and they come back to the community and say what the response was, or just address it as best as they see fit, but have the community members, the students, the teachers be part of that decision-making process, because a lot of this stuff is nuanced. The behavior of the students, the behavior of the drivers at certain parts of the day. I think there's a lot of things that go into that. I mentioned before, I think the studying piece is a huge piece of it. It is extremely difficult for community members to understand why we're not moving forward on changes when there are repeated incidents, and there are a lot of them. And I understand there's a lot going on. I totally agree with Councilmember Glass's point about the Vision Zero coordinator. We are long overdue for that, but I also think that the focus of this person needs to be Vision Zero, which we're still not doing a very good job of, frankly. The messages that come out both from the county government, school system sometimes, but I think largely my concern has been the county government, has not been always totally reflective of what Vision Zero necessarily is. And a lot of that is not a school system issue. I mean, we're talking today about bus safety and bus issues, but that's the symptom of the larger disease. And we need to treat the symptom, but the disease is that we have roadways that aren't safe. We're talking today about the idea that we should have students have reflectors, and that we should prevent students from being able to cross the street in certain places. I'm not saying that those are necessarily bad ideas, but the bottom line is if we have to have students wearing flashing lights and we have to prevent them from crossing the streets in our community, our streets aren't safe enough for them to live. And we've got to address that. We've got to get serious about that. And we're not going to be able to just have an education campaign to solve this problem. We'll talk a lot more about that on Tuesday. There's a much broader discussion, but I think in this conversation it bears pointing out that we've got huge, major issues that we have to resolve, and just addressing bus stops and just addressing buses are not going to address the broader issue, which is we need to do all of it to ensure that our kids are safe. Totally agree about the technology piece. I hope that we look into that. My understanding is in Boston, they have, in New Jersey, Boston, was mentioned earlier, they have introduced some standards, but also New Jersey has implemented Abigail's Law, which is looking at specific requirements for what school buses do and don't have to have. I appreciate the comments that were made earlier about understanding what that means for bus drivers and some of the challenges that may or may not present. But if it's a good enough safety device for every new car to have, it ought to be something that we at least seriously explore and make a decision for every bus to have. I mean, there are no vehicles that are transporting more precious cargo than our school buses anywhere in our community, and it just, we need to not just look into it. I think we need a formal decision of, what technology is available, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, how much it would cost to implement, what are the pros and the cons, what we would need to do in order to train bus drivers, in order to train anybody else involved to be able to implement that technology to keep people safe. I mean, we need to be all hands on deck at the school system with relation to this particular issue, and as a county in relation to all of our engineering issues, because we are at a crisis in our community, and there is just no more helpless feeling, I don't think, than a parent who has their kid go to school and is concerned about whether or not their child is going to be safe walking to and from school. I mean, that should be the safest place to be, walking to a school close by to your home, walking to the school bus, close by to where you live. To be in a place like Montgomery County where that is not a safe feeling for a parent to send their kid off to school is a massive crisis, and I think we need to treat it as such. So I appreciate the conversation that we're having today. I look forward to more conversations. I hope that we can coordinate better. I hope that the Vision Zero coordinator is part of that, but I just think that the focus has got to be on keeping kids safe. How fast buses get to school, how efficient they are. We need to buy more buses if we need to buy more buses. We need to invest in technology if we need to invest in technology. But whatever it is, I know that all of us up here and everybody else on the council who's not here is fully committed to anything that is needed and has demonstrated that to support MCPS in terms of educating our kids, and even more importantly, to make sure that our kids are safe getting to those schools to be able to be educated. And so I'm hopeful that we can come forward and do it, that we could have a more of a bottom-up than a top-down approach, that we could listen to the parents and the students and the teachers who are bringing forward issues that come up, that we are looking at technology, not just seeing what's out there and figuring out what opportunities there are, but seriously analyzing one by one what is available, what we ought to do, a plan for implementation or a rationale for not implementing based on the pros and cons of those issues that can be presented to us. I think the public deserves it. I think our children deserve it, and I think we have to do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Friedson. I did want to give a chance for, and I know the hour is late, but I did want to give a chance for a presentation from our police, and I'll just say this. It's a very interesting concept, and I think that it will be helpful for us once we have the Vision Zero lead to be able to help us with the direction that we head in, because there's an interesting debate that I just had going on Twitter about where it is that responsibility lies. Of course, a driver who's wrong and who is speeding or who is violating the law is wrong. But at the same time, we owe it to folks to make sure that we're providing them the tools to know that if somebody is doing something bad, how you can avoid it. And I don't think we should get away from that. So I think that at the same time, we shouldn't just expect that folks are going to adhere to the law and follow what's there and follow speed limits. And we know in our neighborhood streets that are only designed for cars to really go 25 miles an hour that people go 50. So it's not just an engineering problem. We've got to do our part in terms of making sure that all these pieces, like you said, Councilmember Friedson, fit together. They're all important. We can't just say that it's just one piece. And this isn't about blaming anyone. This is about making sure that we provide all the tools in the toolbox to ensure that we can try and avoid as many of these situations from happening. So with that, let's talk about enforcement and the other things that our police are doing.
And let me just dovetail on that one comment. In Councilmember Glass's town hall meeting, we talked about a different perspective we're taking from the police department. We're going to look at these crashes from characteristics or contributing causes. And to your point about speeding, pedestrian error, driver error, we want to look at what are these human factor characteristics that contributed to the crash. And instead of just worrying about whose side of the coin it is, it's what do we have to do to change it? And I think that's where working with the Vision Zero coordinator, where we have a new script, where we can think outside the box. Well, if this is the characteristic, what tools are available? Maybe not just in the police department or DOT, Health and Human Services and other aspects can come into the game, the full brunt of the county government. So I think we're all in the same direction, and I think, you know, with this new approach, we'll be looking at things better. To get on point when dealing with enforcement is more like dealing with safety. In the police department, most of the things that we've been talking today are coordinated out of our school safety section. And in our audience is Sergeant Jim Whalen, who's standing there. He has over a decade, years of experience. We coordinate the highest number of crossing guards in the state, and we have one of the largest safety patrol programs. And I'll let Dave talk about a lot of the facets that we're doing, but as we look to move forward, we're going to use his experience, but we do work collectively. Joe Popsel is in the back from our Safer and Safe Route schools, and whenever we're looking at new requests for crossing guards or issues that occur, and an example that came up is we had an incident in which Jim told us the crossing guards were not safe at East, West, and Grubb. So we went out there as a group, we made a decision that it wasn't safe. We got with State Highway Administration and we changed everybody from crossing unsafe to being bused. And it's taken 2.5 years, and we hope next school year we will be able to restore the crossing guards back when it's safe. But that's one of those situations where I think moving forward, we're going to work collectively, and then we're going to do what it takes to get it done, and maybe not wait so long. That was a quick decision we made once we realized it was. So I think we're on board with that. We'll just get there with that.
And that was one where the community actually fought us to keep them walking to school and not bus to school. And despite the expert opinions about whether there was safety, whether the crossing guards could provide a safe environment for that to happen, the community across the street wanted to continue walking with a guard and not be bused to school. It was one, we don't usually get that kind of argument. You normally get arguments for buses. In this case, they argued to keep the walking for the convenience. I think in their mind that came over safety.
And so Dave will talk about our school safety section.
Good morning. With my promotion, I've realized that falling behind Chief Didone, I've got some big shoes to fill, and I've kind of jumped in the last couple of weeks to kind of get on top of some of the issues that we've been having to deal with in the recent weeks. One thing that I'll get back on to these topics of the crossing guards, but one thing that wasn't talked about was enforcement. Like what we're doing in real time right now, we talk about the school bus automation, where the high number of stops of violations that we're seeing in school buses. Well, the approach that I'm kind of trying to take with that is look at those stops where we're seeing the high number, and then putting my motor officers or my traffic enforcement officers in those locations, but not just at the stop, the miles of roadway leading up to that stop. Because what I think is that, yes, we're dealing with a violation of passing a school bus, but there's reasons to it. It's speed, it's aggressive driving, it's distracted driving. So when we look at things that we're going to do for enforcement, it's got to be purposeful. There's got to be a reason why we're going to these locations and where we go, because we simply can't cover them all the time, every day. So we have to be smart in how we use our resources to try to make a difference and reduce those numbers. So with that, I'm just going to get on to the topic of the crossing guards, and then also our patrol safety program, which leads to education and safety for walkers to school and the such. So Montgomery County, In our school safety program, we have 173 guards that work throughout the county. Actually, 157 of them are deployed, and then we keep a reserve for, just to backfill for when guards call out sick or when we have a retirement. But we have 157 that are out there or 157 locations. Some of the locations have more than one guard, sometimes two guards. We service every elementary school in the county, and we also service 15 middle schools in the county, and we do not service high schools. We've learned from past experiences that it's just not a recipe for success. There was a lot of non-compliance, and quite frankly, our guards were not in the safest position to deal with some of the students. So we don't do anything with high schools. With that said, of those 157 locations that we are working every day, we do an annual review of those locations, and we determine whether a guard should stay at that location or if they can be moved. We also look at, can we put them other places where there's more of a need? When we do the review, we're looking at size of the roadway. We're looking at the number of kids that are crossing. We're looking at the number of cars that are going through the intersection during our peak times of crossing these students. So that's an ongoing analysis, an ongoing review of what we do. And when things come up during the school year, we just looked at down on Dale Drive as a result of a detour that we're getting ready to experience with the Purple Line. That's not something that we sit around and wait for a yearly review. We're looking at it now as to, are there things that we can do, guards that we can put out if that's a way that we address safety issues there. So there are things that we always do day in and day out, but we do the yearly analysis of where we need guards. And part of that also is we are preparing for the future. So I believe it is September of 2020, Tilden Middle School is going to come on board and open. Well, we've already budgeted and we're put forward a plan to have 2 guards assigned there. So we're looking at the future infrastructure of schools and where we're going to need guards in the future. And it's not as easy as just hiring more guards. We get more and more specific and look at how we can deploy them responsibly and in the locations that are more dangerous than others, so that we can work to get the kids to school safely and across safely. And quite frankly, when we're looking at these locations, we want those locations to be safe for our guards as well, and family members who are walking their kids to school. Switching gears, talk about the school safety the patrol program that is for rising 5th graders in Montgomery County. Montgomery County, it's a very robust camp and a program that they put together. They've a joint operation with AAA, and 2 weeks over the summer, they take a handful of rising 5th graders who will be patrols, and they teach them school safety techniques to be patrols. But the idea is that these kids take it back with them to the school, and then we reinforce it during the school year through principals, through PTAs, and through working, the school safety officers working with the individual kids throughout the year to enforce a consistent pattern of how they do things and how they promote safety in doing their job. One little side note. It's hard to say that there's anything good that came out of the tragic loss of the 9-year-old who was struck by the bus at the end of 2019. But I will say that when that was occurring, 2 patrols that went to patrol camp without the assistance of adults, they went into the back of that bus and they got all those kids, and they took control of that bus and pushed all those kids to the front of the bus so that they did not see anything. Those kids did that because they were taught how to take control of the bus in an emergency situation. It's just an example of what we're trying to instill in these kids, and it's actually sticking. And we hope that continues to be shared with other kids in the program as it evolves. And with that, those are the things that we're doing.
One other thing, there's about 7,000 safety patrols on 100,000 students. It's a small number, but those are the mentors, those are the kids. And every year we have a safety patrol that generally saves a toddler from an incident of traffic, and they get recognized. And all this work that we're doing in the police department is with 3 school safety coordinator officers. We used to have 6, 1 in each district, but we lost them about 10 years ago and they never got restored. Sergeant Whalen, a corporal, and 3 safety patrols. So we try to do the meetings, we try to do the education, but they can only get to the school probably once every 2 months because there's just not enough of them. But we care, these people are dedicated, and we're trying to move forward in a positive direction.
Just to add on to that real quick, with the 3 police officers that are assigned to 6 districts, they are overseeing about 77 or so guards, where if in 2012 when there were 6 of them, it was roughly half that number, and there was a little bit more engagement with each school.
No, that's incredibly important, and we're taking notes on that. I know our staff is taking a note of that as well. That's certainly a budget item that we need to fix. One of the things that I'd like to also see is once we have our Vision Zero coordinator, is having them to actually work with our safety patrols. I think that having them understanding and teaching our students the premises of Vision Zero as potential either future drivers or potential pedestrians, being able to understand the concepts and embrace that, teaching our children about this is incredibly important. And so I think that will be incredibly valuable in having that partnership that's there. Let me close by saying I don't see any other lights on. I just really want to say thank you. This was incredibly important to all of us. And the reason why I asked to convene this meeting is because I wanted to make sure that we were thinking about this, but I also wanted to make sure that the greater public knows that we acknowledge there is so much more work that needs to be done. We understand that we've done some great things and have spent a lot of time and effort and energy and money in ensuring the safety of our children. Accidents will continue to happen. It's unfortunate, and they're accidents. But there are things that we can do to reduce the likelihood of an accident by making sure that we're cutting down and enforcing when it comes to distracted driving, people exceeding speed limits, all the things that we know not only are a leading cause of these accidents, but also on top of it, exacerbate the likelihood that someone's going to die. And so that's not lost on us in terms of understanding that if we can control some of those elements, we walk away with a person like the young man who unfortunately was hit, but is going to be able to see his parents again. His parents are going to be able to see him. We want to try and make sure that if we have those kinds of incidents, unfortunate as they may be, that we don't have to have that ultimate tragedy at the end, right? And I think that using some of the methodologies that we talked about, embracing Vision Zero when it comes to narrowing lanes and doing all of the things and reducing speeds, all the things that are there, we can help to accomplish that, but it's not going to be the only thing. We also have to do all these other pieces, and whether it's moving school bus locations, whether it's making sure that we have additional officers that are out there to help enforce, whether it's making sure that we have more patrols or more crossing guards, all the things that we know are working in areas. If we have to do those things as well, we will do them too, because it really is a collective effort of bringing them all together. So with that, I really want to thank my colleagues for very constructive questions and suggestions that I think are going to take us a bit farther. I will just say, I want to double down on Councilmember Albernos's point about the Google Maps, and because I thought to myself as I was driving in this morning, down Darnestown Road, and the Waze app came up and it said dead animal on the road, which unfortunately in Darnestown happens quite a bit. If I could get an update about that, why can't I get an update about where a school bus stop is? I mean, it's really something that, again, and so if we, as one of the larger school districts in the nation, as one of the leading counties in the nation, can start to put pressure on these apps to include things like this that are incredibly important. If you can notify me about a speed camera, you can notify me about a bus stop, right? And so from that perspective, there's much more work that needs to be done, and I think collectively we can make that happen. So thank you guys. We're adjourned.